Well, here we are again for Flame of Truth. Thank you for being with us today, and we hope that you'll just be blessed by the next 26, 27 minutes. We're going to do God together, and I hope we'll wrestle with something that'll be a blessing to your life today. It's amazing how you can just open the Bible and find something, and it fits you today. Hoping this will be like that for you. So I'm Dan Smith. I'm the senior pastor down at Garden Grove Church. If you haven't seen us before here on Flame of Truth on LLBN. But before we go on, we're going to get to have No Limits again, who I just love. This group from Soweto, 2 million people in this very tough little township outside Johannesburg. I got to go and spend a day one time. Anyway, they're a group, Seventh-day Adventists from our church tradition, who got together in the 90s and began to have a little group called No Limits out of Soweto. And there's a website, and they have CDs, and they're just fantastic. And they're going to sing, All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name. Just enjoy this.
Bayete guche swinkosi zitobingelosi magatweswe umukele gutiwe bayete magatweswe umukele gutiwe bayete magatweswe umukele gutiwe bayete bayete guche swinkosi zitobingelosi magatweswe umbuqele gutiwe bayete magatweswe umbuqele gutiwe bayete magatweswe umbuqele gutiwe bayete.
Ye seed of Israel's chosen race, ye ransomed of the fall. Hail him who saved you by his grace and crown him Lord of all. Hail him who saved you by his grace and crown him Lord of all. Hail him who saved you by his grace and crown him Lord of all.
Tibonga bezizwe aba kulelizwe bamu kotamele yena gutiwe bayete bamu kotamele yena gutiwe bayete bamu kotamele yena gutiwe bayete magu Tibonga bezizwe aba kulelizwe bamu kotamele yena gutiwe bayete bamu kotamele yena gutiwe bayete bamu kotamele yena gutiwe bayete nalabaya abangcwele nabo singakuqa simdumisu simakade gutiwe bayete simdumisu simakade gutiwe bayete simdumisu simakade gutiwe bayete.
Well, thank you. No Limits. What a gift. I hope someday we can just be in a concert with them and have an hour and a half of that. Aren't they great? There's just a sound that they have together from Africa and the gospel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, we're wrestling with the story of Solomon. We went gone from early on, from Genesis all the way to Abraham, to Noah, Ten Commandments, Deuteronomy, and now we're down to the story of Solomon. I just start off with this crazy story, true story, from one of our colleges in our church tradition. I won't tell you where. They were having a concert. I don't know if it's Friday night, when it was. For all the young people are there, and evidently it was a little more alive, shall we say, than the president of the college could handle. I don't know how long he'd been there. I don't know him at all. But evidently, he felt like this was just over the line, and he had to protect the reputation of the university. And he took the microphone and he said, "I'm sorry, but this concert is now over." Everything shut down. The young chaplain of that campus, as a young pastor, he had planned the concert. He went out there and grabbed a microphone and said, "No, it is not. He has no authority over this." And the concert went on. Dueling microphones. Now, I don't know what happened to either one before it was all done. I do not know. I'm sure it was a difficult moment in the life of that university. But is that what is going on in each of our minds? Dueling microphones. One voice is saying, "Go do that. That'll be great. That'll be a lot of fun. You need to do that right now." The other one saying, "No, that's over. That's a bad idea. That'll be a terrible mistake. You'll be awfully sorry if you do that." Dueling microphones. How do you balance out the dueling microphones? When someone is saying it'll be no big deal. Solomon, the story we have the early Solomon and the late Solomon. You know the story when Solomon is young. And he's going to be the new king. And God comes to him in a dream and he says, "What would you like? I'll give you one wish, anything you want." And it says in the story, 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5, "Ask me for whatever you want me to give you, a free shot." And he asks for wisdom. "Give me an understanding mind so I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong." And then verse 10, "The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this, because you have not asked for a long life or riches for yourself or the death of your enemies. I will give you what you asked for, and I will also give you what you did not ask for." And Solomon gets it all. He gets wisdom, the smartest man the world has ever seen, and also the richest and the most powerful. Amazing reality and potential for him to be the king at the center of the then known world, and the whole world would come and know about God. He would establish Israel as the richest, most powerful, godly nation in the world if he had stayed true to that, the early Solomon. But somehow it goes the other direction. 1 Kings 11, verse 4. "As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord, as the heart of his father David had been." Began to compromise. One wife, then another, pretty soon 1,000. Began to worship their gods from all over the world, even Moloch. Even the one where you offer children sacrifices. Tim Schroeder, one sermon, wrote about this. He said, Solomon goes from this man who is saving a baby's life by pretending to cut it in two to solve these two women's problems, to now taking babies and offering them to Moloch. What happened? Where is the downward spiral that goes here? I've done weddings. Every pastor's had this. You do one wedding in the afternoon, and then that night you're in someone's home and refereeing a divorce. You say, how can one lead to this? The couple that promises to God in white dress and a tuxedo vows, and then this kind of thing is happening. Too bad. The downward spiral. And it says in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 3, Solomon loved the Lord, and he followed all the things of his father, David, except that he offered sacrifices and burnt incense at the local altars. He loved God and did everything his father David did, except sacrifices. Except. Do you have an except? Do I have an except? You love God, you believe in God, you go to church, it's all good, except. I don't want to be the one to guess what your except is. I really want to tell you what mine might be. Just know the risk of an accept. What happens? In this particular sermon, this particular story of Solomon, it may not be heaven or hell, salvation issue. It's what could have been with God's incredible blessing in Solomon's life. Smartest, richest, most powerful. What could have happened that didn't happen. The problem with sin is not just that it wipes out your salvation. It's what it does to your potential, to cheat you of the glory of God. I've used many times a story of the Lakers when we had Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant on the same team, 3 world championships. But they can't live with each other. Each one wants to be the one in charge of the team, be his team. One has to go. He gets another world championship in Miami. Now Lakers have finally gotten 2 more because there's 2 or 3 good players. Maybe they've learned their lesson. You have to find a way to live with each other. Loss of potential. Too bad. Mark Twain, the famous writer, married a Christian. And for a while he tried to do what he could to play the game with her, go and pray at meals and go to church with her, but he just couldn't believe it. Went back to basically being an atheist. And pretty soon she began to kind of go with him. If he wasn't going to do it, she didn't either. She gets depressed. And he says to her, if it works for you, go ahead and go. Go ahead and pray. And she says, I've forgotten how. I've forgotten how. It had slipped away. It had gone so long. She had lost her connections. What happened to Solomon? It all starts with one except. And each except leads to another except until you've forgotten how to live a godly life and to live a righteous relationship with God. Forgotten how. I traveled a lot for a while, and one of my friends told me about these Bose $300 headphones. And they noise cancellation headphones. There's cheaper ones. And then someone just gave them to me as a gift. I didn't ask. Just gave them to me as a gift. Incredible. You go onto the plane and all the noise and everyone's talking, and you put them on, and it tunes out almost all that sound. That's what happens when you start with an accept. God says, accept. And you begin to lay down one layer of resistance to the Holy Spirit. Accept. It makes it easier for the next accept. And pretty soon you can't hear God, and you have forgotten how to hear the voice of God in your life. Be very careful. How does it happen? Well, it starts, of course, is to get things almost right. Solomon had it almost right. He had everything else right. He was going to church. He went to the temple. He worshiped God. Almost. Except. 1 Kings 3:1, he made an alliance with the king of Egypt and married his daughter. Starts with 1. Ends up 1,000. One exception. My friend, Pastor Sam Lenore, is at La Sierra University as a chaplain, one young, wonderful preacher. I can remember one of those early sermons at our church. He would tell about being in College Dale, where he went to school in Tennessee. And a group of them went out to be in some boats to go across some lake. And he said, there's a little hole. Seems small, no problem. But water began to come in, and more water. Finally, they're trying to bail it out. Finally realized, we're going to sink. With one little hole. Somehow the plug was missing. Someone had left the plug out. Little tiny mistake. One little accept. But you end up sinking in the middle of the lake. Be careful about allowing some plug in your life to be let out. Be very careful. And then you begins to get the idea that you're the exception to the rule. You're above the rules. Somehow this may happen to everyone else. If they smoke, they'll get cancer, but not me. I'm not going to get this person pregnant. This won't happen to me. I can tolerate these kinds of movies. I can filter it all out. And I'm the exception to the rule. These consequences will not happen to me. Tiger Woods talked about, he thought he was the exception. You make so much money, and you are so talented in this other area in your life that somehow you think you're above the rules. You're married to one of the most beautiful women in the world. 2 beautiful children and a house and everything else. But somehow you think you can pick out a girl and have her tonight. And you're above the rules. You're the exception. And there'll be no consequences. Solomon knew. The book of Deuteronomy had a list of guidelines for the king. Deuteronomy 17. No getting horses. No going back to Egypt to get them. Solomon broke that, went back to Egypt, and got 12,000 horses. Deuteronomy 17:17. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. He becomes the richest man in the world. Deuteronomy 17:17. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He has 1,000 wives. 1 Kings 11, verse 2, you must not intermarry with them because they will surely turn your hearts away from God. Solomon knew. And yet it says, nevertheless, Solomon held fast to these gods and to these wives. There's always that nevertheless. You know, nevertheless, I think I can get away with it. I don't think the price tag will be too great. Or I'll get back to God later. Be careful. Be careful. Who was Solomon's father? It was David and Bathsheba. Look at the mistake they made. Terrible mistake. And it comes down. Be very careful, those of you who are parents. What pattern are you establishing? Someone came to see me this week. I can't give you any details at all. Not a member of my church. But the story she told me of what was happening in her life that she needed help with right now. And then at the end, she had to admit she had a daughter, roughly, of age, 20, I don't know how old. Almost identical situation. And I said, where's it going to stop? Are you going to make some changes so that your daughter can respect you and follow you as her mother, setting a standard? What pattern are you setting that will go down 3 or 4 generations? Be careful. Solomon began to ignore the warnings. Dreams came. God sent dreams to Solomon. If you will be fully devoted, God will bless you. I will bless you. You can have it all, but if you don't, if you are not fully devoted, these things will happen. If you turn away your heart from me and follow other gods, these things will happen. Other countries will come. You will lose your power. You will lose the influence that I was going to give to you. Warnings. Shut them down. I had a friend, fellow students years ago, growing up, incredible talent, more talent than anybody I've ever met. Went to seminary with me, became a youth pastor, became director in a conference for the youth, a shooting star. Weeks of prayers and chapels and speaking, amazing speaker, talent, music, athletics, everything. Ridiculous. Began to compromise, lost his family, lost everything. Some of us grabbed him and just said, come on, come on, come on. Don't do this to you, to yourself, to your ministry, to God, to your family. Don't. Threw it all away. I don't know where he is right now. I saw him once. He was remarried and back in church. So much potential gone, wasted. Be careful. In our tradition, we have one writer that says, every except leads to another except. Every small compromise, you don't even hardly notice. One compromise leads to another, and a spiritual giant becomes someone offering sacrifices to children, of children to the gods. How did it happen? Be careful. Well, the good news is Solomon gets back to God. Somewhere he wakes up. He has everything. God always uses the extremes. And so if you think somehow if I just had money, I would be happy, God says, well, let me show you what happens with someone who had unbelievable amounts of money. Didn't do it for him. Well, if I could just be married, or if I could just have more sexual experiences, if I could just have that, somehow then I would be happy and be okay. And God, well, let me show you. Someone had 1,000 wives. And look what happens. It's worthless. Destroys his life. And so God uses a Solomon as this very powerful example. Takes everything to the extreme. It doesn't work. You need God. And finally, Solomon, at the end of his life, writes Ecclesiastes, I've tried it all. Nothing mattered until I got back to God. And then he writes this incredible book of Proverbs. Incredible book. Nothing else was enough. But now in Proverbs he writes, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. You've heard the famous story. The minister woke up on Monday morning, got a little note after the sermon, single sheet of paper in there, one word, fool. And he got up in front of his church and he said, many people have written me notes, but we didn't want to sign their name. This time I had someone sign their name and forgot to write the letter. That's a fool. Turned it back on them. And Solomon is saying, I was a fool when I tried everything else away from God. I thought there was an except. I thought I was the exception. Nevertheless, But let me tell you, the fear of the Lord is the wisdom. Knowing God. He comes back. He says, you may have voices fighting in the microphone in your head. You may have a voice that is saying, stay away from all of that. Those are all the rules in God and church and religions. Who needs all of that? Come out here. And he says, don't listen to that voice. I tried that voice. Listen to the voice that says, God, in purity and holiness and goodness. There's no exceptions. Every time you accept with God, there will be eventually a price tag. Be very, very careful. Don't do what I did. I wasted years of my life. We could have had every single person in our country be rich. There would have been no poor people. We would have had temples and buildings and farms, and the whole world would have come to learn how to do righteousness. We could have had a wave of righteousness all over the world. We had that chance. God had blessed us. He put us at a crossroad for that to go everywhere in the world. We lost it because of my compromise. Except, be careful that you don't lose the glory that God has given to you. Go back and read Proverbs. Don't cheat yourself. And then we have this final incredible story about the temple. If we build it, they will come. I wrestled hard with this passage. Where is the good news in this story? What happened with these incredible gifts and blessings that God gave Solomon? What blessings can we have? Where is my promise of riches? I'll give it all to you. If we promise, if we pray to God for wisdom, won't He give us riches and power and all the rest? I cannot promise it to you individually. We understand that miracles are not signs that if we had enough faith, God would do exactly the same miracle for us. But I would say one of the ways to understand miracles is that God will fulfill that same miracle today through the church. God has blessed the church. God has given the church. Solomon was able to build a temple. They had riches. You and I may not have riches all by ourselves, but God has the church, the totality of what we can do. When the tsunami hit, we raised an offering, $26,000. When there's a crisis in Haiti, the world church can get together and send millions of people and dollars to make a difference. We can send shiploads. We can build churches and schools and hospitals that make a difference. We can have an LLBN that is broadcasting God all over the world, and India and China and Arabic channels and all the rest. Amazing what God is able to do through the church. The power that God has through the church. God may not make you and I rich as Solomon, but the church has power. 2.3 billion Christians all over the world. The power. If we would just do what Solomon did and ask for wisdom, to know the truth about God, to have judgment, and make God first, and stay humble, no exceptions, no nevertheless, only truth to God, then God would bless the church, and the whole world would come to our churches and ask about our God. How is it going so well? How are your young people so incredible? How do you have families like this? How do you have schools like this, hospitals like this? God is blessing you. We want to learn. If we as a church would just pray Solomon's prayer and stay fully devoted to God, no exceptions anywhere. Incredible what can happen. Solomon built that temple. Incredible. It honors God to have a beautiful temple. I am pastoring close to the Crystal Cathedral. Incredible. Now they're going through a difficult time with a bankruptcy. But the church can do very powerful things. We can build beautiful buildings. We can have colleges. The assets and resources are there in the world if we would just be fully devoted to God. The power of the church. And then finally, we need to be finished with this. Where is grace in this story? Where is grace? Where can we find grace in this story where Solomon went so far away from God as to offer sacrifices to Moloch? Well, let's be very clear. He gets to build a temple. God allows him to be the one to build this incredible temple. He wanted to be a temple of grace, that if people anywhere, you read Solomon's dedication prayer, if people have trouble, if they're in trouble, they've committed a crime or something, and they need forgiveness, they can come here and hold on to the horns of the altar, and you will forgive. Solomon has a world audience, and he preaches a sermon of grace, a temple where there will be sacrifices, where someday Christ will come and be the temple and be the ultimate sacrifice. There is grace. And the temple is filled with smoke. God's Shekinah glory and blessing. Incredible. Incredible. Symbol of grace. At the end of Revelation 15, it says there will be another time when the temple will fill with smoke. And I and many others believe that that is the parallel. The temple filled with smoke when the temple service began. No priest could enter. And at the end, when God finally says enough is enough, the temple is going to be done. There will be smoke in the temple, and no priest can go because Jesus has finished. Everyone has made their final choice. But there will always be grace. God is always a God of grace. Jesus Christ is the one. And so Solomon ends his life with grace. God forgives him and allows them to have a book in the Bible. Ecclesiastes in the Bible. Proverbs in the Bible. This one with so much potential, who made such a waste out of his life, could have done this. But now at the end of his life, he gets to write down his wisdom. And we can all read these books and learn the truth about God. And every Bible that has been published all over the world has the wisdom of Solomon. God has given Solomon grace. And he will be someday in the kingdom. And someday we will worship at the temple. And we will remember Solomon's temple. And now we are the church that scatters all over the world. We have the legacy of Solomon. We have the power to make the difference, to take the truth about God Solomon was supposed to do, to build the temples and churches that Solomon was supposed to build. We can do it through the church if we are fully devoted to God. No exceptions, no nevertheless. Let's do it for the glory of God.